Good evening. It's great to have you here this Wednesday night. My name is Simeon Best. I'm the Program Administrator for Cuyahoga County. Welcome to the Light the Night to Shape Your Future Teletown Hall, featuring some of our leaders here in Cuyahoga County. This evening, we anticipate hearing some meaningful dialogue around two very important topics, which are the 2020 census and racial equity. So I invite you to listen closely as our leaders enlighten us and give us direction on how a complete 2020 census is essential to racial equity and an inclusive democracy. We would like to thank everyone who submitted questions for our panelists. We plan to have your questions answered during the latter part of this session. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce to you the moderator for tonight's dialogue, Carlin Wells. Carlin Wells is a reporter from Spectrum News 1 Ohio, working in Cleveland, where she produces original content for daily newscasts and digital platforms. Carlin is a community-focused journalist who enjoys telling stories that impact and inform those living in the greater Cleveland area. Prior to coming to Cleveland, she was a reporter and weekend anchor for WDVM TV, covering Northern Virginia and the Shenandoah Valley. This time, I'd like to turn it over to Carlin Wells.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Simeon. I really appreciate being here and moderating this important and timely discussion. So let's get into introducing our panelists for this evening, okay? So first up, we have Congresswoman Marsha Fudge, who is a committed public servant, first elected in 2008. She represents the people of the 11th Congressional District of Ohio, and she serves on various committees and subcommittees, including being chair of the subcommittee on elections. Congresswoman Fudge consistently fights for voting rights, access to affordable quality health care through the Affordable Care Act, equitable access to quality education, and so much more. County Executive Armand Budish is a lifelong Clevelander. He was elected to a second four-year term as Cuyahoga County Executive in November 2018. During his first term, County Executive Budish oversaw the county's first ever strategic plan, and he is dedicated to bringing and keeping businesses here in Cuyahoga County, and he has more than doubled the number of Cuyahoga County children attending high-quality pre-kindergarten on scholarships. Budish is also co-chair of the Complete Count Committee, which was created to ensure an accurate count in the 2020 census. And Ms. Chantel Brown has joined Cuyahoga County Council during the 2015 to 2016 session, where she serves as the County Council representative for District 9. As a member of County Council, Mrs. Brown's advocacy ranges from fighting to reduce the infant mortality rate to increasing the comforts of senior citizens aging in their homes. Brown is chair of the Human Resources, Appointed and Equity Committee, and also serves as the Vice Chair of Education, Environment, and Sustainability Committee. And today, on her birthday, she is taking the time out to talk to all of us and all of you about the census and racial equity. And lastly, we have Dr. Jerry Sue Thornton. She's the CEO of Dreamcatcher Educational Consulting Service, where she coaches and provides professional development for new college and university presidents. She served as a president of Cuyahoga Community College, the largest and oldest community college in Ohio, since 1992. During her tenure, the college became a leader in educational innovation, workforce training, and economic development. She is recognized as one of the 50 most influential people in Northeast Ohio. Thornton is also a Complete Count Committee co-chair. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I'm so excited to ask you some questions and get really good answers. So let's jump right into it. This is a timely discussion, and everyone has a lot of questions about the census. So let's start with County Executive Budish. So many people have misperceptions of what is asked on the census and why. They ask very specific questions. Talk to us a little bit about why these questions are so vital and what's asked on a census.
Well, thank you, and thanks for doing this, Carolyn. Appreciate that. The questions are surprisingly simple. I mean, they are specific, but they're simple. It's really easy. I mean, when I looked at this, I said, wow, this is not tough to do. I mean, it's questions, they really want to know how many people are out there. This is a count. That's what this whole thing's about, is counting the people. So they ask you how many people are in your home or your apartment. There's some basic data questions that they ask so that people like Congresswoman Fudge in Washington can better develop the programming that they do for all of us, design the programs that fit our needs. So they ask questions like, what sex are you? What age? Your date of birth? What race are you? Those questions are specifically designed so that the programs that are done primarily in Washington, also statewide and countywide, can be best directed in the way that they're needed. So the questions are easy. They're not intrusive in any way. They're all confidential. People should feel comfortable answering the questions. And generally, any information that's put out is redacted, so your name doesn't get out there. It's unidentified, it's aggregated information.
Absolutely. And Congresswoman Fudge, last year, President Trump attempted to have a question on residents' immigration status included on the census. There will be no citizenship question, though some believe that the damage from just saying that is already done for that immigrant population and with their distrust of the government. So what is the importance of reaching out to this population, especially now, to get them to respond to the census?
Well, I think it's no different than how they treat Black. I mean, certainly we have as much distrust for the government as any other group of people, in particular, immigrants. But what I would say to them is that it is important for them to make sure that they take care of their families. Some people think about themselves all the time. But I say to them, if you have a kid in a school, you need to fill out the census. Because if you don't, they're gonna cut free and reduce breakfast and lunch. If you have a parent who's on Medicaid or Medicare, you need to fill out the census, because otherwise the formula is going to cut money from your community. In the state of Ohio alone, it is estimated that if we do not fill out the census, which we don't as a general rule, we can lose as much as $300 million. So Trump and all of his friends don't want us to fill it out so that they can send that $300 million to someplace where they want it to go. I don't think that all is lost because of the question. I think we just have to educate people on why it's important.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Dr. Thornton, there are certain groups that are considered hard to count communities. In every census, there are various socioeconomic and demographic factors that can influence self-response. What are some examples of these hard to count communities in Cuyahoga County, and how are you working to get them to respond?
We are trying to reach out to organizations, places where people go, friends, family, all who can get the word out about how important, as Congresswoman Fudge just outlined, how important the census is. And so by reaching out, we hope to get into communities where we have not been able to count before. Oftentimes, senior citizens are very hard to count. They don't go online, they don't fill out the forms, or they don't have family members that count them or help them if they're living alone to make sure they are counted in their households. And so we're trying to make sure that people understand the value of the census, what they lose when they don't fill out the census, and those neighborhoods and communities that oftentimes get overlooked because they overlook themselves. They don't count themselves. Just like voting for your own best self-interest, we need to also realize that the census is about your own best self-interest. So oftentimes communities who are afraid, you just mentioned immigrant communities, And a lot of immigrant communities are very much afraid with what will happen with the information when I fill out the census. When they know where I live, who I am, my age, my race, etc., what will happen? Will that information be used in some way against me? And the issue is that information is protected, and Congresswoman Fudge can certainly, at the high level where she sits, can speak to the fact that the census information is protected. And so those communities who believe that somehow they're in danger, somehow there's an issue, somehow there's a problem, we need to make sure that they understand that that is not the case. And we also need to help each other as neighbors, as relatives, as friends, help each other to get the census filled out for each of us so that we are, in fact, responding in our best interest. And we are looking at our own issues in terms of representation. And those communities can feel safe, protected, but it's so important that all communities, all people in Cuyahoga County do fill out the census.
Yeah, and speaking of those hard to count communities, it was easier to get in contact with them pre-COVID-19 because you might be able to go door to door, have face-to-face events. So let me ask Ms. Brown, how has COVID-19 affected the typical process of completing the census? And how does the census impact disaster relief and emergency response efforts work during a time like this?
Thank you. I think there's actually an advantage right now with the COVID-19 because the deadline for self-reporting has been extended due to the physical distancing and the physical contact limitations. So it gives us an opportunity and a time to educate and inform others about the importance of completing the census and how easy it is to do, as the other panelists have already stated. I mean, you can do it online, you can do it by phone, you can do it by mail. And the fourth and final way to do it is to wait for someone to actually come knock on your door. We don't recommend that. If you self-report, then no one will knock on your door. So I think it's important that we've gotten somewhat of an extension due to the COVID-19 crisis. As for the disaster relief and emergency response efforts, having a sense of who lives where helps prepare for worst case scenarios in case of a disaster. For example, if we were to have a tornado, it's important to know how many people live in the area that would be affected so that we can deploy the appropriate amount of resources to take care of that specific community. Even with the COVID-19, the census data has been helpful with determining the trajectory of the spread, or the steepness of the curve, if you will. It's helped to identify hotspots and what the potential for spread might be, particularly if there are neighborhoods and communities like mine with a large aging population and people who are more susceptible to contracting the COVID-19 virus. So again, the information, as Executive Budish pointed out, is general enough, but is specific enough to be extrapolated or separated for specific needs to a community. Therefore, if we underreport this information, we're just doing ourselves a complete disservice, especially in times of emergency, and that's when we need the most help.
Can I just add to that one thing?
Of course.
We have sent out hundreds of billions of dollars in COVID relief funds. Most of the time, we determine how much to send to a community based on the census. So when we're not counted, we get shortchanged. So the 30 million or whatever Cuyahoga County got, it probably should have been millions more. But we didn't have accurate numbers because we're not counted.
I could just add to that. Congresswoman Fudge is absolutely right. When you look at the numbers for this, the COVID relief money that went out, you take a county like Montgomery County, which is near Dayton. They were just over 500,000. 500,000 population was the key number you had to reach to get the big paycheck from the federal government. They were just over, so they got $95 million. Then you look at Lucas County, which is where Toledo is. They were just under the 500,000. They got zero from the federal government directly. That is a swing of $100 million. And it's all dependent on the census. That's why we need people to be counted. Congresswoman Fudge is absolutely right. And she could probably tell you 20 programs 30, 50 programs that are dependent on the numbers, and how much you get is dependent on the numbers. And that money goes directly into our communities to help the people who need it the most.
Absolutely. And just to piggyback off what you were saying, Ms. Brown, about the possible silver lining in all of this, about there being an extension. Some people thought, oh, National Census Day was a few months ago. Am I too late? Oh, I'll just catch it next time. They don't realize that it has been extended. So talk a little bit about this extension and the fact that people still have plenty of time to fill out the census.
So I'm going to yield to Dr. Thornton for the exact date, but I know what the last date for the census is October 31st. So the in-person counting originally was July 15th, but I think that has been extended until August now. And so we want to make sure that people are taking the time, and it doesn't take very long. Again, there's 3 easy ways to do it before we get to that next step where someone from the census comes to knock on your door. So we need to take full advantage of that, because we've just heard from County Executive Budish and Congresswoman Fudge how this is impacting our lives right now. We only get the opportunity to do this every 10 years. And so we can't let this opportunity escape us, because millions, literally millions of dollars are on the line for our community. So I think that it is imperative. We are, as communities of color, Black people specifically, there's been a distrust. People have been under the belief that this is a mechanism used to find people who are in delinquent situations. That is not the case. I would go as far as to say, if you are on social media right now, then they can find you. so this is not the government's way of tracking people. This is a tool that we utilize in the government arena to be able to disperse resources. And since we only get to do it every 10 years, it is very critical that we make every effort to get as accurate of a count that we possibly can, because it literally can cost us millions of dollars. And not only that, lives, because when we talk about COVID-19, this is a life or death situation, specifically in the Black community, because we are being disproportionately affected. So it's a must for us.
And we really don't want to keep talking about the deadline, even though it was extended. But the reason people often think, oh, I've got plenty of time, I've got weeks, I've got months, I can put it off. Now is the time to get on the phone, get online, whatever's the easiest way for you to fill out the census. Now is the time, because if we let it pass, so many things get in the way. Everyday life gets in the way. And I know I have a to-do list that's extended way out into the future, and I know
Right.
it someday. So now is the day. You know, we are fired up about our rights. We're fired up about wanting to make sure that we are respected, included. The census is doing all of that. We respect you. We include you. We want you. We are asking for you to fill it out. And so now is the time. And hopefully after this program tonight, you'll say, I am doing this tomorrow. I am doing this before the week is out, because I need to get it done. It's about my own self-interest. It's about the people in my neighborhood, the people in my community, the people in my church, my friends, my family. That's what the census is about.
And if I could just add one more thing, because we've been talking about the importance of the money, how that's impacted by the census, but I want to just add, it's also the power in government. When you look at the way the lines are drawn for the congressional seats, for the state legislative seats, those depend on the census numbers. If we all get out, if we had 100% count, we could get maybe 3 more Marcia Fudges into Congress. Draw the line so we have the better representatives from up here. But if we don't get counted, you lose seats. And we need more people from Northeast Ohio in the state legislature. We need more people from Northeast Ohio in all levels of government. And we can do that if we all get counted.
I'm just going to give you 2 quick numbers. Cuyahoga County right now is reporting at about 62%. Summit County at about 70%. Now, the wealthier communities in our districts, they're reporting at 80%. So they're going to get the share that we don't get because we don't count.
County Executive Budish, what was the county's response rate in 2010? And what are you doing to increase the response rate for this census?
Well, the Congresswoman just talked about what it is now in Cuyahoga County. We're about 62%, which is slightly behind where we were in the last census. Last census, we were at about 65% at this time. So we're slightly behind, which is not good. We're significantly behind the overall state average. So, it's not a great result right now. And Congresswoman was right on it. The wealthier areas are being counted at a much better rate. Seven Hills, 85%. But East Cleveland is 31%. And I can tell you, Seven Hills doesn't need the help that East Cleveland needs. And, but the count is all important in how the resources are divvied up and how the power is set. So what are we doing? We're doing things like tonight. We're doing as much discussion about it, talking about it, getting the word out, communicating, making sure people understand that this is important and they have to be counted, and it's not that difficult. They can go on the website, my2020census.gov. They can do it as soon as it is over. In fact, if they get bored of what we're saying, they can go right now and fill it out. It takes 5 minutes. It's not a big deal, but it is a big deal to do it. If you don't do it, the results are bad. So we need people to do it.
And I would like to add to that, I did it on the cell phone, and it really didn't take very long. I was waiting on something and I thought, let me fill out the census right now. And I simply did it on the phone. So you don't have to have sophisticated computers, etc., to be able to do it. It's pretty simple, pretty easy, but it's about doing it.
So moving forward, and this is for County Executive Budish, this month is National Pride Month, a time when we celebrate and acknowledge our LGBTQ+ community and all the great additions that they add to communities, right? So can you talk about what is included in this decade's census that will provide more options for acceptance and inclusivity for this group of residents?
Well, there's no direct question in the census, are you LGBT or Q? There's no question like that on the census form. But for the first time, there is a question. If you wish, you can talk about how you're living with a same-sex partner. And that is very helpful. For the first time, it communicates that the numbers, the fact that we have an active LGBTQ community in this area, that it's vital, and that people are proud of that. And that again impacts the legitimacy, it impacts the numbers, it impacts the power and the money that comes out. So for the first time, people can register that in the census.
And Ms. Brown,
I would just simply like to add that, if I may, that the community may have specific concerns and needs that certainly the census creates opportunities to resolve. Health issues. And I think Congresswoman Fudge mentioned it a little early. The dollars that come to our county, to our area, based on the census count, can impact one's health. And certainly that's a community where health issues may be of interest, may be of concern. Education may be, helping to get better jobs. So the census does impact so many parts of our lives, no matter who you are. And if you're counted, you're simply helping not only yourself, but everyone in your community.
thank you for that. And I want to pause on that thought right there and ask Congresswoman Fudge a question. A lot of times people actually don't know what programs depend on census funding. And they don't realize that these might be programs and initiatives that they depend on to get through their everyday life. So can you just touch on a few of those programs that are directly impacted by census funds?
Head Start, Community Health Center, Title I funding for schools, TANF, SNAP, WIC, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, SSI, housing assistance, Section 8 or voucher housing, and I could go on. Almost anything that the federal government does, they do by formula. And those formulas are generally based upon the census numbers. So just about anything that comes, you think about a food bank, nobody thinks that that has anything to do with the federal government, but they receive TANF money. And so you have to realize that anytime you're looking at federal money, it's generally based upon a formula. So it's everything.
Yeah, thank you for that. Ms. Brown, how can responding to the census positively impact the racial inequalities and the overall political system?
So county executive touched on it a little bit. The census, when he talked about the representation that we can get with our state legislators as well as our federal legislators, but the census can also highlight segregation and some of the disparate impacts that it has on communities and compare it to others that are more integrated. As Congresswoman Fudge pointed out, just the reporting of the numbers in the more affluent communities versus those who, like East Cleveland right now, who aren't reporting as high. We can see a very apples to apples comparison how those resources are impacting those communities. It can also help identify housing patterns, which have been found to be a central issue relative to racial inequity, including but not limited to life expectancy, education, access to transportation, and results in our criminal justice system, how people are policed in their communities. I mean, all of these things have impacts on inequalities, and our census can help us with the baseline, if you will, and also help us with the baseline for funding as it relates to these issues. I would just go on to say, if we aren't counted, then we are just left with anecdotal stories that are unsupported by data. And that has been the biggest struggle, I would say, for legislators like myself and Congresswoman Marcia Fudge, because the information is really the proof, if you will, of our life experiences. Therefore, responding to a census can remove the hurdles for elected officials like us who are advocating for people who historically haven't been involved or interested in government. So it's those type of things that can help us, give us the tools that we need to get the resources into our community to make them better.
Absolutely. Congresswoman Fudge, if the census helps identify disparities in our country, what is the next step in addressing those identified disparities? What action can then be taken?
Well, I mean, we can just use what's happening right now with the coronavirus. We know certain census tracts are being hit harder than others. And so we have been able to say to the federal government and to our local governments, you know what, you need to do testing in this neighborhood because they are being disproportionately affected by the virus. Or we say to them, let's figure out how we can make their lives better because we understand that they live in very dense communities. We understand that they are essential workers. What do we need to do to at least provide them with the access they need for healthcare, for counseling? How do we provide PPE? How do we provide the things they need? Because we can't move them all, but we know that they also live in very dense populated communities. They take public transportation. They work in grocery stores. You know, they are the bus drivers. They are the people who are most affected by this disease. So let's figure out how we can help. So now we need to send contact tracers to those communities. And so there's so many ways we can use the information. We use it to track high poverty communities so that we can say to the federal government, look, Cuyahoga County has this tract, this census tract that is extremely high poverty. We need to focus resources to that particular community.
And Dr. Thornton, I see you shaking your head vigorously over there to everything that Congresswoman Fudge is saying. Can you add to that a little bit about the action that can be taken once these disparities are identified?
Well, you know, she's so right. As she was talking, I was just thinking about how important data is, how important numbers are. And a lot of times we sit back and let others do. You know, I'm going to let somebody else vote. I'm going to let somebody else do that versus it being my responsibility. I have to be counted. My number is important in that data. You know, and we often look at, very, as she indicated, very dense areas, cities like Cleveland, cities like East Cleveland, et cetera, Warrensville Heights. We look at those cities and we know there are a lot of people in them. And yet, because people aren't completing the census, they're undercounted. And there's no way we can say East Cleveland has a lot of people. But what does that mean? We need the numbers. And by each person filling out the census, letting us know how many people are in their household, the numbers then get counted. And that is a huge factor in the distribution of funds, as Congresswoman said, across the board. And in having been in education, I know that firsthand with grants, with scholarships, with dollars that come in for students of need, people of need. And without being able to count them, you don't get those dollars.
Ms. Brown, what are some known barriers to achieving racial equity, and how do we overcome those barriers?
Well, that is quite a loaded question. I would start with trust. Trust is a huge barrier. The government, as Congresswoman Fudge said at the top of this call, hasn't given us very much confidence, especially in the Black community. But there is a shift in the landscape that is undeniable right now. We have much more diverse representation, which is inevitably, I think, forcing conversations to shift as well. And as we talk about conversation, that other barrier is honest communication. Particularly in environments where our own leadership, if you will, is at risk. And what I mean by that is in corporate settings and public meetings. As Black people, and I'll speak for myself, but I feel like this is a universal thing that we've been conditioned to choose our words carefully, as not to inadvertently upset or offend people, especially those that don't look like us, and especially if their position is more powerful than ours. So we all have to get a little bit more comfortable with being uncomfortable. As Black women in leadership, we have a lot of experience in this, but more of us need to do it so we can speak openly and honestly. Another thing is that we have to be willing to exercise and extend grace in this type of environment, because many of us are entering uncharted territory. So we can't be so quick to pass judgment if we feel offended or if we feel like someone is being offensive. We have to give people the benefit of the doubt initially and then use it as a teachable moment. But I will say this, if we see a pattern developing, then we also have to recognize when individuals are unwilling to change and treat them accordingly. And finally, I guess I would say, as an elected official, we must be willing to use our political capital and will for the benefit of those who have been oppressed, suppressed, repressed, and depressed. We can't continue doing business as usual. And this goes for the county and the business community. We must work diligently to be anti-racist. Like, it's not just enough to be, I'm not a racist. We have to work diligently to be anti-racist and seek out ways where we can use our authority and influence to deliver equity and inclusion across the board. So that's.
Can I?
Go ahead, please, Congresswoman. Please
Can I
help us this out.
No, you're doing great. But let me just say, this call is about the census because we're talking about taking responsibility. We also need to take responsibility for ourselves. People will say, oh, it doesn't make any difference if I vote because it's all the same. All you all are the same. And so that's the way they feel about the census too. It's like whatever the government does doesn't make any difference. This morning I read that Donald Trump is nominating his 200th person to the federal judiciary. Only one of those persons is non-white. and that person is Hispanic. 200 judges that will determine our path for generations. And then we will not fill out a census or say, you know what, let me do my part. Let me let people know that I'm here, because when I take this action, then I have a right to stand up and fight with somebody who wants to treat me unfairly. You know, we have to be counted, because if we're not, people see us as invisible. And when you're invisible, people don't see or hear you.
Well, I'm going to piggyback off of what you like to say. If you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. But to add to that point that you talked about, Donald Trump and his appointments of the 200 judges, I don't think it's enough to just say that. Those people they have lifetime appointments, and these aren't exactly senior citizens that we're talking about.
They're young.
They're very young, and they're very much. I can't speak to their beliefs, but they're
not qualified.
Generally, they don't look like us, and I will trust that my Congresswoman said that they aren't qualified, and we need people to be aware of that, because those 200 seats make up nearly, is it 1/3 of the federal appointments across the United States?
Yep.
So that's a huge number and a huge impact on our future. So this is a really serious situation. So thank you for pointing that out, Congresswoman.
And I would just like to add to that. We've been talking about Black people in our community, but I would also, for those of you who may be listening in, tuned in from the Hispanic community, from the Asian American community, we need you. We need all people in our county. We need everybody stepping up to the plate. And I think we're talking about minorities because oftentimes minorities are the hard to reach communities as we are trying to make sure everybody gets counted. So if you're listening tonight and you happen to be Latino, if you happen to be Asian American, if you happen to be Black, if you happen to be old, if you happen to be young, we need you to fill out the census because you count. And this representation is about all people, and it's to the benefit of all people. And so if you happen to be listening and you have not filled out the census and you just say, you know, I am going to take it on myself to be responsible. And I am not going to let fear be a factor in my not stepping up and stepping out.
And, you know, I think, and I'm going to finish with this, but I think something as simple as, if your census, just think about it, Cleveland Public Schools, I think that upwards of 80% of the students there are people of color. That's from the census telling us that, and from their data. Then we should be able to go to the schools and say, how many of your staff are people of color? It gives us the opportunity to hold elected officials and appointed officials accountable. We can talk the talk, but we need for people to walk the walk.
And this is about the census, obviously, but I'm glad that Congresswoman Fudge and Councilwoman Brown both mentioned voting in their discussions as well, because that's the way you make change. There's no other way. That's the best way to make change is go to the voting booth or by mail and elect the people that we need to get elected. You know, in Northeast Ohio, we end up with what, Congresswoman, 50% maybe in a good year voting?
Oh, that's only in a presidential, and that's in a good one. As a general rule, 30% for most elections. We do get as high as 50 to 60 in a presidential.
Right, and this is a presidential year. If we could get 70%, 60, 70, 80%, my God, we'd be able to change Ohio and change the country. But we got to get people out to vote. That is, in my view, the most important thing we can do. And you know, the census is the second most important thing. How's that?
That works.
How's that? So County Executive Budish, how does advancing racial equity in local government improve collective success? Because we've been hearing a lot about minorities. We've been hearing obviously a lot about the Black response to census. But everything trickles down. It's a domino effect. We all live here in Cuyahoga County. So talk a little bit about how advancing racial equity will benefit everyone.
Well, starting, local governments where a lot of policies are created and almost all the policies are implemented. Local government is critically important to the citizens. It's the direct impact. Congress passes laws and allocates funds, but Congresswoman Fudge mentioned SNAP and a number of the other programs. It's the county, it's the local governments that administer those programs, and how we do that has an impact on people. If we are fair and equitable, focusing on minorities, that helps everybody. There's no question about it. Lifting minority community lifts the entire community. I'll give one example that occurred fairly recently. We got some money, we the county got some money from the CARES Act. We have to change our buildings, the buildings that the county owns, to make them more acceptable for people to be working in and visiting in light of the pandemic. So we have to move walls and change things in the buildings. It's about a $30 million project. And we put out bids for work, and I give a lot of credit to Councilwoman Brown, who looked at the contractors that won the bids. And to be honest, they were a lot of big national white construction companies. Now, they were good construction companies. They are well qualified and do good work. But Councilwoman Brown stood up and said, we need to take another look at how this was done, because, if we can give some of that business to minority contractors, that will help the entire community. Minority contractors, for example, tend to be local. They tend to, have their business and hire the people from our local communities. And that then, that they spend the money here. They go out to the restaurants here. They buy their materials here. And the more experience they get, the better they get, the bigger they get, the more they can do. That lifts the entire community. So Councilwoman Brown stood up. We agreed with what she said, and we're changing it around so that we will be able to give more to local minority businesses. And that's how you start to change things. I will say, Councilwoman Brown was a good example of that when she was talking about making people feel uncomfortable. She can do that very effectively, and it worked. And thank you.
Thank you, I think.
Whether he meant it as a compliment, I'm taking it as one.
I will take it as a compliment that I know it was intended to be, and I really appreciate that. And that's what good government really is about. And when you have representatives that are willing to work collaboratively and listen, that are like-minded, and in order to get that fair representation, it's important again that we count ourselves in the census. So I am very grateful for the administration's leadership, because oftentimes people think of the legislative and executive branch as adversaries, but things work much better for our society when we work collaboratively. And I think that was an excellent demonstration of that. So thank you, County Executive Buvish.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to get to these last two questions quickly, because then we want to segue into some of the questions that the community sent in. So Congresswoman Fudge, this one is for you. What are some effective ways to hold our leaders and policymakers accountable for the achievement of racial equity?
We can legislate as much as we want. You can't change people's hearts, but what we have to do is something that I think Councilwoman said. We have to have the discussion. We have to make our elected officials know what is important to us. You cannot sit home and throw something at your television. You need to voice what you are thinking. You need to do what these young people are doing out here in these streets every day. You need to demand that you be heard, because it's always the squeaky wheel. We know that. And so you need to become the squeaky wheel. You need to let them know that these are things that are not acceptable to you, and or this is what I want to see you do. As the mayor of a city 10 years ago, I would never have thought about defunding the police. I'm thinking about it now because I'm listening to these voices in the street.
Absolutely. And lastly, Dr. Thornton, for you, what does it mean to be a trusted voice in a community? And how are you, as organizational leaders, leaning on these trusted voices to encourage responding to the census? Because people will listen to who they know, who they're familiar with, who looks like them.
Right. Well, you know, and you can hold a title and have a platform, and certainly those of us who are co-chairing the census and the legislative representatives here tonight would not advise people to fill out the census if we thought there was anything bad that was going to happen to them. So we are trying to be trusted voices, but we know that we are voices because of often the positions we hold in our community. But you're absolutely right. There are people in your community that you believe in and that you trust, whether it's a minister, a rabbi, whether it's a community leader, a family member, a neighbor. Make sure you talk with them about the census. Talk with them about the need for you to be counted and get their views, get their opinions, read and gain insights into why it's not destructive, it's not detrimental, but it's only positive for you and the community. So go to people that you trust and you believe in your community, whether it's religious leaders or whether it's neighbors or whether it's family members. Whoever you trust, talk with them about the census. If you have fears about filling it out, if you have fears about being counted, and get beyond those fears so that you can be counted and you can help those of us who are representing you, who are speaking for you, who are in those positions as our legislators are, to do things for you. We can do it only because you're counted. And I would like to say one other thing. We haven't talked about counting babies, counting children. Oftentimes people don't think that babies should be counted in the census. If the baby is here, count the baby. The baby can benefit from a lot of the resources that are brought to our county and our community. So don't overlook anyone in your house. Maybe the pets don't get counted, but the babies get counted.
The babies get counted. All right, so moving on to some of our community focused questions. Let's see here. All right, and anyone who wants to weigh in on these questions can feel free to do so. So Rhoda Cantrell, a Glenville Community Engagement Specialist, says, it feels like many, not all, of our youth are disengaged from civic community activities. Do you agree? And what is being done to engage youth, particularly Black youth of Cuyahoga County, to participate in the 2020 census? And do you see those same strategies crossing over into engaging that youth when it comes time to vote in November? So a lot of little questions there, but you get it.
I'll jump in if that's okay. I do agree that I think pre George Floyd, it did feel like a lot of our youth were disengaged from the activities, but post the George Floyd incident, and even when you speak about some of the gun violence action that happened earlier in the year, a lot of those initiatives were prompted by young people. So I think it just depends on the timing. Relative to COVID-19, it's kind of challenging to get to our young people physically. Before that, I used to go to schools and different youth programs to try to touch base with them. But what I personally did, and I don't recommend this for the rest of the panel, but I did a rap. So that was also one of the things that I attempted to do in the form of edutainment. I've always been a person that really enjoys music, and I thought it was a creative way to connect with young people, but especially young Black people, to get the message out about the importance of the census in a way that was both educating and entertaining, which combined edutainment. So that's what I'm doing, and I think those same things can also be applied to the November election, which has also been my approach with trying to get younger people engaged in voting. So we got to meet them where they are, and we have to be willing to listen to them, because they're really the future, and they have outstanding ideas. And I would just encourage us to be more open-minded as it related to our youth.
You know, I really did enjoy President Obama's graduation speech that was televised. And I think he really spoke to the youth of our communities, saying how important the youth are, not only for tomorrow, but for today. And it was a message of inclusion. It was an invitation to jump in, make the difference. And I think that's what we're all hoping. A lot of us will be passing from this scene, and we won't be the people who are making decisions and who are holding the office. We need young people to educate themselves, become aware of the facts, understand what they're doing, being informed, and then act.
You know, Dr. Thornton, I think maybe hopefully you'll agree with this. We have done a poor job at educating young people as to how the government even works. They don't teach civics in school. These young people don't know why it's important for them to vote, why it's important for them to be involved. And we've done a poor job of telling them that. But when you sit down and talk to young people and say, you know what, I'm the person who decides or helps decide how much you get in Pell Grants. I'm the person who helps decide that your school building is not crumbling, or that you get equipment because we're going to help you get resources. Mm-hmm. Or if you tell them, you know what, you got a little sister that you've been taking care of, we can get her in Head Start. They don't understand how government is structured. Or we can say to them, you know, Dr. Thornton has at Tri-C, they have a training program in manufacturing that nobody maybe knows about. They don't understand how the system works. Right. And so one of the things that I have tried to do is to get younger people involved by having them run for office, so that maybe their contemporaries and their peers will see, you know, there's really something to this, because you can't reach them all. But I'll say this last thing. When we worked with the schools 2 years ago to have young people come and vote from school, we didn't get enough of them out, clearly, because we didn't get the participation from the schools we should have gotten. But the young people who voted, I stood there, and when they came out, I said, how did you feel? They said, I felt great. I felt grown. I felt like I did something good. Yeah. It's just engaging them, and that's what we've not done.
Right.
And that leads into this next question, and we just have a few minutes left. So Megan Gibson says, as leaders in the community, you made small steps before you became who you are now. So what would you share with others desiring to make a difference, but might be intimidated by the notion of trying to dismantle a mountain of systemic inequalities?
Find a mentor. Mm-hmm. Grab a hold of somebody and just run with them. If you see somebody that's doing some things that you think are good, they may not be able to be with you all the time or spend a lot of time with you, but I tell you, I don't know any elected official or any other community leader that will not talk to somebody and steer you to somebody who can help you, even if it's not them. So don't be afraid to go and ask for some advice or ask for help, because that's how you get there.
As well as having role models. Look at people that you admire. And as Congresswoman Fudge is saying, they will often be very happy to talk with you if you approach them. But even if you just watch them, watch their behavior, watch the things they do, watch their bravery, emulate them. Even if you can't get close to them, watch them.
Yeah. The other thing is, I would say, it's always easier for people to help you when you have helped someone else. People help people they like. And so if you just are a person of good character who is willing to do your part, to pay your dues, you will be fine.
I echo that. I was going to say, you can't eat the elephant in one bite. You have to take your time and invite others to work in areas that you may be lacking knowledge or experience, to the lady's point. And for me, the first step for me was learning. Before I got into government, I'm a hands-on learner. I started going to my city council meetings, and that's what kind of prompted my interest. And I kept going and cultivated some relationships along the way. So the first step is to take a sincere interest and try to learn as much as you can, and be be willing to stand on your own convictions. It may not be popular, but if you know what you're doing is right and you're not motivated by your own self-interest, then as the Congresswoman pointed out, the benefit of the greater good will avail itself to you, and you will get opportunities that you probably never even believed would come your way. I am a witness to that. I'm a witness. So,
Are we all?
Mentioned that she started by going to council meetings. I would encourage people to go to things, go to meetings, go to participate in organizations, get involved. And in terms of being intimidated, it's actually, for a lot of people, it would be a lot easier now because you can go on the screen and
Right.
you don't have to be there. You can turn your video off if you don't want people to see you, but start getting involved in things. You'll learn a lot about opportunities that are out there, and maybe you'll find something you like and you want to pursue.
And I will quote Oprah Winfrey when she talks about dreaming big. Don't make your dreams small, make those dreams big as you can make them. And then you just take it one day at a time in your walk toward fulfilling those dreams.
Thank you all for those thoughtful answers. I'm sure there are a lot of people taking notes right now, and they should be. So last question we have time for from Mitzi W. This one is for Mr. Budish and Mrs. Fudge. She asks, how you as people in government leadership positions, how will you use your influence to ensure that the momentum built in the last few weeks to honor and preserve Black lives will cause actual changes in laws and society?
Well, this is a softball for Councilwoman Brown, so I'll let her go first.
well, thank you. I appreciate it. I think to your point, County Executive Budish, I'm just gonna keep pushing, being vocal and making our needs heard and addressed, and really pulling and calling on my peers and leaders like Executive Budish and my favorite Congresswoman to support me in these endeavors. So that's going to be my approach. But I think you two, being the higher ranking leaders among on this call, if you will, I understand why that question was presented to you. So I'm going to throw it back to you, County Executive.
Well, the reason I said it was a softball for Councilwoman Brown is she's been very busy with the administration on a resolution through the council that structural racism is a public health crisis, and not only making a declaration, which a lot of people are doing, but coming up with an action list as part of the resolution, which I think is critical to making this happen. So, Councilwoman Brown again has my admiration for doing that, and it's moving the county forward. I will say that the county has been very involved in equity issues for the 5 years I've been here. We do a lot of things. We are funding First Year Cleveland, which is designed to reduce the infant mortality rate, and a lot of focus is on the minority community with that. We invested in doubling the number of kids, particularly in minority and impoverished areas, doubling the number of kids in our high quality pre-kindergarten education, get kids a good start in life. We have been doing small business investments, and 50% or more of those are going to minority and female owned businesses. We recently did a small business fund for businesses impacted by COVID. And again, a large portion of those are minority-owned businesses. So we've been working hard, again, the administration working with council, which is something that you don't always see in Washington, but
Well, let me tell you what, Armin. On Friday, we are going to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We're going to pass it in this House, which is going to stop chokeholds. It's going to stop no-knock warrants. It is going to make sure that when there's police misconduct, that we collect that data nationwide so that you can't go from one community to the next if you're a bad cop. We're going to make sure that if there's excessive use of force, that it is investigated by somebody other than your local peers. So that's the first action we're going to take. I'm also this week going to vote for DC statehood. It is about time that the District of Columbia doesn't have to deal with taxation without representation. We're going to work this week. I'm in Washington for those things this week. So it makes a difference what we do and who's in that place, but it also makes a difference what we stop. We've got colleagues that want to do away with the Department of Education. We stopped it. We have colleagues who want to do away with free and reduced breakfast and lunch because they said it doesn't make kids any smarter. We stopped it. So we stop a lot of things that we don't necessarily talk about, but we're here and it makes a difference.
And that's why we have to fill out our census form so we can get more
Right.
Councilwoman Fudge there, people who are doing the right things for us. And, you know, unfortunately, we have that now in the House. We don't necessarily have it in the Senate. So,
Right.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for your words. Thank you all for your just knowledge on the census, on voting, on everything that we need to know right now to make a change when it comes to making sure we're counted. And for those of you at home, whether you're watching on the Cuyahoga County YouTube channel or the Spectrum News 1 Facebook page, some notes and calls to actions. Like Dr. Thornton said, don't wait until the last minute to fill out that census. You can take 5 minutes and fill it out tonight, tomorrow on your cell phone. And also, there's been a lot of conversation about keeping this movement going past this moment, right? The conversation does not have to stop here. Make sure you reach out to your local county or state representative with your questions, because clearly they have the answers, all of the answers for you. So thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much to Dr. Thornton, Ms. Brown on your birthday, Councilwoman Fudge, and County Executive Budish for your thoughtful insight and answers on tonight.
Thank you.
Just want to say, lastly, we thank everyone. Thank you, Carlin Wells, for a wonderful job as a moderator, and to all of our guests here, our county executive and our Congresswoman, our Dr. Jerry Sue Thornton, Councilwoman Brown. We appreciate everyone taking out the time to talk about the importance of the census and racial equity. We hope everyone has a great night. We actually turn on the lights. Terminal towers will be lit up tonight in honor of the census. And so we're asking everyone to participate and do that. Again, my2020census.gov. You can fill out the census there. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.